Welcome to Understanding the CAGED System. In this particular series of lessons, we're going to take that CAGED system that you might have heard about and talk about how it orients itself on the fingerboard. And we're going to associate pentatonic scale forms with it. It's a great way to understand the neck, because when you look at the neck, you can become overwhelmed. You have so many notes and redundancy and things like that. So we're going to chop it up into some sections. And I'm also going to relate it to the minor pentatonic forms. Now in the next segment, we're going to go right through and talk about the CAGED system and what it means. But to prepare ourselves for that, I want to make sure that in this segment you understand your basic chords. If you're watching this video, you probably are ready for some lead work. You know a C chord, just your basic folk C chord. A basic A chord, a G chord. I use the term folk chord for chords that have open strings. The E chord, and the D chord. Those are the 5 basic folk chord forms that we're going to use, and we'll structure them up and down the neck as if you were using a capo. In the next segment, we'll take the first form and associate the arpeggio, the pentatonic scale, and any kind of scales that would lay on top of it. Now, to demonstrate all of these different CAGED forms in the key of C, I'm going to have a jam track. Let's listen to the jam track for a moment. It's just a static C add 9 chord laid out on the piano. Well, if you're going to strum against that, you should know that you can play this C chord. So far, it's pretty basic. But you want to be able to develop your ideas, not only chord voicings, but your lead work and all kind of fills, by taking an area of the fingerboard and seeing everything that exists within it that is applicable to the chord. We have a C chord. The notes are C, E, and G. C, E, G. 1, 3, and 5 out of the C major scale. In this position, anytime you have this chord form, you would have the following arpeggio. And when I give you an arpeggio in full range, that means as low and as high in position as possible. And these will all be diagrammed out. You're going to get charts for all this stuff. You have this C chord, and if you play the low E, that's the third of the chord, then the G, the C, the E, the G, the C, the E, and the G. Those 3 notes form an arpeggio. Obviously, we've talked in other series about how those would be great tones for building a melody. Let's demonstrate that. This also means that if you see the arpeggio, you don't have to strum the whole big block form. Now, let me give you some terminology. A block form is a large chord voicing, exactly what we'll be dealing with in this lesson, out of which you can extract various voicings and inversions and things like that. You might have seen in a chord book, if you bought some chord dictionary, it showed all these different fingerings for a C chord down here. Those are all C chords with various voicings, arrangements of those 3 notes that make up the chord. If you see the arpeggio, you can quickly see any of those chord voicings. So this particular lesson doesn't just apply to lead guitar or to fills. It's great for rhythm. And if we needed to move to another key, this is the beauty of this CAGED system. We're taking the letter C, which is the first letter in the word CAGED. It is assigned to this C form voicing. To get you to where you can transpose and see it all over the neck, let's change our fingering. You know what a capo is, that mechanism that clamps across the neck? You would finger the C chord with your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th fingers. The root of the chord is going to be the little finger on the 5th string. That would always be the root. If we move up, doesn't sound right because we didn't raise the open strings 1 fret. You've got to raise everything 1 fret. All that requires is a 1/2 bar, meaning you would bar the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd strings. But is it still a C chord? Well, of course not, because you've raised the pitch 1 fret. Your root is on the 5th string. You need to know the names of the notes on the 5th string. This would be a C sharp or a D flat major chord. Do you understand that this is derived from this C chord form? This is a great way for you to get up and running on movable chord forms. You start off guitar generally learning your open chords. Simply refinger them to allow you to have an index finger free. Then you move up. Here would be D. And when you do that, you could see your old friend, the D chord right here. It's just the top 3 strings forming a triangle. It exists right on the top of this voicing. Therefore, you have access to any major chord with this new voicing. Now this is the first chord, the first letter of the word caged. You'll learn a lot of information associated around this. I'm going to show you fills, scales, and possibly modes on top, because once you see the basic format, you can always embellish it with more notes. If we had to play a song that had an F chord, sure, you could play an F bar chord down here, but you want to force yourself to use these other forms, even though they may not be the most comfortable thing in the world. When you have to solo or play fills, the first thing you're presented with is the harmony. Lay the chord out with the voicing that you want, and in this case, you're going to use the C form 5th string root. Then you'll have an area of activity within the framework of the chord. You'll see scales and things like that that tie on top of it. Now this also means that you would have other chord voicings that are smaller groups. Let's go back to this original C chord. I'll play against the track. If you look at the right hand of the video, you see how I'm playing adjacent string groups. Either 3-note groups, 4-note groups. I can split. It's important for you to consider your right hand. When you're just clamping a chord form with your left hand, a great deal of variety can be achieved by mixing up what you do with your picking hand, your right hand. All right, now, in this particular track, we're in the key of C. We're playing over a C chord. That means that this C chord form would also exist 1 octave higher. An octave is always 12 frets in a linear fashion on the neck. You would clamp your capo all the way across the 12th fret. That's the equivalent of the open string. It's just 1 octave higher. You form your C chord, and that's the area of activity. Whatever you want to do, that's the C chord. This is a great way for you to get a higher voicing. It may be too murky in the mix for you to play down here. In the next segment, I'm going to talk about the pentatonic scale that resides on top of this arpeggio, because that's where you're going to get your fills from.